So hello and welcome to another IELTS video. Since many of you have been requesting this in today's video, I am actually going to go through a reading passage because the third one is the most difficult one, and that's why in this video I'm going to focus on a reading passage number 3. So it's the most difficult one. We will go through it and I'll solve it so you can see how I do that. So here is the text in front of me and it's reading passage number 3 and it's taken from official IELTS training material, so it is as realistic as it can be. So first things first, what I usually do, I read the title and also the subtitle as well to get an overall idea of what to expect in that passage, and then I will read rapidly through the text, which is known as skimming. So you do this quickly to sort of like warm up a little bit because you can't just like start right away trying to understand every single word there. So this is my strategy. Now I'm going to do that. So the title here is An Ideal City and the subtitle is Leonardo da Vinci's Ideal City was centuries ahead of its time. And then I'm going to quickly skim through that. The word genius is associated with the name of Leonardo da Vinci, a true Renaissance man. So the first one is introduction about the man himself, and then the Renaissance marked the transition from the 15th century to modernity, and then they're giving some historical background in the second one, around 1486, after the Palestinians that killed Harvard. Alright, so I skimmed through it, now I'm going to go straight to the questions. So in this reading passage, we have two types of questions. It is true, false, not given, and then in the second part is the summary completion. So these type of questions are quite typical with IELTS reading passage 3. And make sure that you familiarize yourself with these type of questions. When you go to the exam, you know, like you don't have to keep thinking, what should I do here? Because since you're already familiar with these type of questions, you know exactly what to do. So you're not wasting time trying to understand the question, but rather focusing on actually solving the passage. After skimming rapidly, the second thing you have to do is you go straight to the questions and then you have to read the question. When you read the question, the most important thing is you identify the keywords in the question that will help you find the information to actually solve that question. So if I start with the very first question, true, false, not given. Now when I read number 27, people first referred to Leonardo da Vinci as a genius 500 years ago. So the key word here is the man himself, Leonardo da Vinci, and then genius. And I remember reading that, the word genius. So it is in the very first paragraph. I'm going to go there, and it starts with the word genius is universally associated with the name of Leonardo da Vinci, a true Renaissance man. He embodied scientific spirit, artistic talent, and humanist sensibilities. 500 years have passed since Leonardo died in his home at Château du Clos-Lucé outside Tours, France. The word genius is universally associated. It doesn't say it was first associated. It's universally, like generally associated with the name of Leonardo. So we know him as a genius. But I don't know like when he was first referred to as a genius, and that's the annoying part. So, and based on that, it's just people first referred to Leonardo as a genius 500 years ago. I'm gonna say not given. I know that he died 500 years ago. Did people call him a genius at the time or only after he died 100 years from? I don't know. I really don't know. We know that the word genius is universally or generally associated, but when was it first connotated with Leonardo? We don't know. And based on that, it has to be not given. These false, true, not given are really tricky, I have to tell you. So it comes with practice, so you just have to process the information in a logical way. Is the information provided in the text? Does it agree with the question? It does. True. I simply cannot find the information. Not given. Can I find the information that contradicts or gives a different type of information related to the question? I can. So it is false. As simple as that. You need to simply base your answer on what is explicitly or categorically mentioned in the passage. It wasn't mentioned when they first referred to him as a genius, so it is not given. As simple as that. So now I will move to the next question, number 28. The current climate crisis is predicted to cause more deaths than the plague. So the keywords here are the climate crisis and then deaths, because we are comparing deaths deaths, so that information should be there. And then we have the plague. So we are comparing the number of deaths from two different causes, climate change and the plague. And the plague is actually an infectious disease that spread throughout Europe back in around, I think, the 14th century or the 15th century, around that time. And I think it was referred to as the Black Death. So there is some infectious bacteria that was spreading around and killing people. Is probably the closest we can relate to is the COVID pandemic, when we had the COVID virus that was spreading around. So that's what a plague means. And here, since the information is comparing the number of deaths from two different causes, these are going to be my keywords: climate crisis, deaths, and the plague. And that's what I'm going to try and find in the text. So since the questions actually follow a chronological order, that's what I'm going to be focusing on. I knew that my first information was in the first paragraph, so the second question could be somewhere after that, and that's what I'm going to try and find. Now when I look at the third paragraph, around 1486, after a pestilence that killed half the population in Milan, Italy, Leonardo turned his thoughts to urban planning problems. Following a typical Renaissance trend, he began to work on ideal city project which, due to its excessive cost, would remain unfulfilled. So when I look at the third paragraph, when I see around the 1486, after a pestilence that killed half the population in Milan, Italy. So the first keyword that I can actually spot there is kill, and I know that is related to deaths. So these two words are like a synonym. Now, the other thing is a pestilence. I'm not gonna lie, I haven't seen this word before, but I can immediately guess from the context here that a pestilence is more like the plague. So that's one of the things that you should know. You don't need to know the meaning of every single word that you're going to encounter in your IELTS reading, because some of these words are really advanced. You don't see them quite often. So it doesn't matter that in order to score a high band, you need to understand every single word. I'm going to be honest with you. A pestilence is a word that's new to me. I haven't seen it before. But immediately from the context here, I can straight away guess that is kind of like a synonym with the plague, or an epidemic actually, or a pandemic. I can look it up right now just to confirm. So yeah, it's a deadly and overwhelming disease that affects an entire community. So it is a synonym with the plague, and there you go. But you don't really need to have seen or learned this word before, and that is what you should be aware of. Focus on the more common words. In the IELTS reading, it is very often that you're going to encounter some really advanced words or some purely academic words that you probably haven't seen before. However, in order to score a high band, you don't need to have learned everything in advance. And that's the beauty of it. You can always guess based on the context of the sentence, and that's literally what I did there. So the first piece of information that I can get from here is that the plague killed half of the population in Milan. Now I'm going to keep on reading. Leonardo turned his thoughts into urban planning problems. Following a typical Renaissance trend, he began to work on an ideal city project which, due to its excessive costs, would remain unfulfilled. Yet, given that sustainable urban models are a key cause of global climate change today, so this is my third keyword, which is the global climate change, and it is a synonym with the climate crisis that was mentioned in the question. It's only natural to wonder how Leonardo might have changed the shape of modern cities. As I continue reading, it just says that this is what motivated Leonardo to start working on the project of his ideal city. I guess he was trying to plan things in a way that would actually minimize the number of deaths if something like this happens. And then, following a typical Renaissance trend, he began to work. So that's when he began to work, however, which, due to excessive cost, it means it is very high cost, which means it was very expensive, it would remain unfulfilled. So that means that it was never put into his plan, or his project was never actually put into action. And then in this sentence, yet, given that unsustainable urban models are a key cause of global climate change today, it's only natural to wonder how Leonardo might have changed the shape of modern cities. So what this sentence is saying is that climate change that we have today is actually caused by the way how unsustainable our cities are, and the author here just wonders what if actually the design that, or the project that Leonardo had in mind, what if it was actually put into practice, what if it was implemented, how different cities today would be from cities in the past. And probably because he had some sustainable ideas, the author here is just wondering if we had implemented that ideal city project today, climate change would have been different. So here the information in the paragraph is very different, and the information that was in the question, it was comparing the number of deaths from these two different causes. However, it doesn't give me that information. So the question here, the current climate crisis is predicted to cause more deaths than the plague. Since that information is not provided in the text, I don't know how many people are dying because of climate change. We do know probably there is an estimate of the number of people that died, but it was given only for Milan. And since this information is not provided, I'm just going to say it is not given. Now, if we move to the third question, number 29, some of the challenges we face today can be compared to those of earlier times. So my keyword is challenges today and earlier times. Although I expect them to be different, it's not going to be exactly earlier times, but we have to look for something that signifies the past. So let's go back and try and locate that information. Since the information to answer my last question was in paragraph 3, I'm gonna go back to paragraph 4 and start from there and start scanning for the relevant information that will enable me to answer that question. Now I can also locate different sentences that can actually relate to that question. Leonardo designed extensive hydraulic plants to create artificial canals throughout the city. The canals, regulated by clocks and basins, were supposed to make it easier for boats to navigate inland. So to make things easier for a boat to navigate inland was obviously a challenge at the time, and I think is still a challenge today. And here the information, rules still followed in many contemporary cities. A contemporary is more like a modern city. So they are referring, so contemporary refers to today, and then we have the challenges, which could be the boats navigating inland, and also we have the earthquakes, which obviously affect the cities today and back in the time. So I think based on all this information, what I have here is I'm gonna say it is true that some of the challenges, I'm gonna give it a true right away. Now if I move to question number 30, Leonardo da Vinci's ideal city was constructed in the 15th century. When I was reading that information from paragraph 3, it was, he began to work on an ideal city project which, due to its excessive costs, which means expensive prices that it would require, it would remain unfulfilled. And what we mean by unfulfilled, it means that it was never actually constructed. Unfulfilled, it was never realized. So this tells me right away that his city was not really built. I know that information already, so I'm gonna give it a false. And this one here is actually reconfirming my answer. Indeed, it wasn't until the 19th century that some of his ideas were applied. So before that, nothing, not that city project, none of his ideas were actually applied. Only in the 19th century. Now I'm gonna read question number 31. Poor town planning is a major contributor to climate change. So my keywords here are climate change and town planning maybe, but climate change or climate crisis or global warming, that's what I need to look for. So as I mentioned earlier, when you read the first sentence of the paragraph, it gives you what to expect in that paragraph actually. Climate change is actually more of a modern problem. Now when I really think about it, the text talk about Leonardo da Vinci, who existed in the 15th century, and usually in these academic tests, most of the time there is a chronological order of the text. So they start with a brief introduction about the past, and then they progress, they talk about the main ideas, and most of the time they come to the recent modern times in the second part or in the last part of the text. So actually that's where I could expect to find that piece of information. If I get to the very last paragraph, today Leonardo's ideas are not simply valid, they actually suggest a way forward for urban planning. So I have the keyword today and urban planning. So remember, it was poor planning in the question, so I see the word urban planning, which refers to today's planning, and then there is the word today, which talks about modern times. Now, if I keep on reading, many scholars, so scholars are like scientists, think that the compact city built upwards instead of outwards, integrated with nature, especially water systems, with efficient transport infrastructure, could help modern cities become more efficient and sustainable. So sustainable is also a keyword that's related to climate. This is yet another reason why Leonardo was aligned so closely with modern urban planning and centuries ahead of his time. So based on this information, I'm going to give it a true. Because we know that if you design in a good way, you could actually mitigate or you can reduce the impact of climate change. That's what the paragraph is saying. So if poor planning, which means like when you don't design it in a sustainable way, obviously it's going to contribute to climate change. And that's what I'm going to say here. It is true. Now, if I move to question number 32, in Renaissance times, local people fought against the changes to Pienza and Ferrara. So my keywords here, straight away, I can already see Pienza and Ferrara. So I'm going to try literally unique, because these are names. I haven't really paid attention if it was a person or actually a place. And usually the place is named after the person. I remember seeing those two words as I was reading. So it was in the 4th paragraph. And if I go straight to the place where they are mentioned and then I start reading from the beginning of that sentence, I don't even need to start to read like the whole paragraph. If I see them, they are mentioned here. The rigor and method behind the conscious conception of a city had been largely missing in Western thought until the moment when prominent Renaissance men, Renaissance was also one of the keywords in the question, pushed forward large-scale urban projects in Italy, such as the reconfiguration of the town of Pienza and the expansion of the city of Ferrara. So now I know that Pienza is a town and Ferrara is a city, and if you don't know the difference, a town is usually smaller than a city. So if I go back to the question, in Renaissance times, local people fought against the changes to Pienza and Ferrara. So the changes here, the synonym in the text is the reconfiguration. A configuration is when you set up something. Reconfiguration is like you redo it. When you do something, you do it the first time, and then when you redo it, it's like you do it again. So when you configure something in a certain way and then you reconfigure it, obviously you are making changes. So those are my words. Now what the statement here says that local people fought against the changes. Let me go back. So what I'm told here is that prominent Renaissance men pushed forward large-scale urban projects in Italy. Some men, Renaissance men from that time, or that movement, put forward, proposed, or these projects where they made some changes to the town of Pienza and the expansion of Ferrara. These works surely inspired Leonardo's decision to rethink the design of medieval cities, with their winding and overcrowded streets with houses piled against each one another. Now, what I can see from here is that, so prominent Renaissance men, the word prominent, it means some major or like someone, few people with some sort of power, authority or some influence at the time. So I can see when prominent Renaissance men pushed forward, it was few people who pushed forward. Now, what do the local people think about those changes? That information, unfortunately, I don't have in this passage. I cannot locate it. So I know that some people with influence or some power pushed forward, proposed or suggested these reconfiguration project. However, I don't know what the local people first thought about that, whether they resisted, whether they welcomed the idea right away. So we don't really have that piece of information. And since it is not mentioned in this passage, which talks about this information, based on this, I'm going to say it is not given. And this is the correct answer. So I'm going to go back to this. In Renaissance times, local people fought against the changes to Pienza and Ferrara. I don't know, so I'm gonna say it's not given. And I know it can be confusing. You might be tempted to think that it was those men or like those people who pushed forward. So you might confuse men with local people. However, the word here that's telling me the difference is prominent. So when I say someone is prominent, it means they are like leading figures or major figures, and not everyone can be a leading figure. So it's only few prominent men who actually proposed that idea. They could have reacted in different ways. Some were opposed, some were welcoming. However, I don't have that information, and since I don't have that and it's not mentioned anywhere specifically, I'm gonna say it is not given, and this is the correct answer. If you ever see a name of a person or a place or a city in the question, that's probably the easiest question to answer, because it's gonna be the exact same word, and then you just find the sentence in the paragraph that mentions that city or place, and then you will definitely most likely find the information that will enable you to answer that question. Now if I move to the next one, so if I move to question 33, Leonardo da Vinci kept a neat, organized record of his designs. I read this, it was one of the sentences at the very start of one of the paragraphs. It is paragraph number 5. It is not easy to identify a coordinated vision of Leonardo's ideal city because of his disordered way of working with notes and sketches. The question said that he was neat. The opposite here is disordered. If I say it's neat, it means that it's in a tidy state. It's in an organized state. When you tidy up your room, you organize it, you make it look neat. The opposite of that is disorder. So Leonardo da Vinci wasn't very organized, because he was drawing sketches here and there. So it was not a neat. So I already have that information. I'm gonna say it's false. Leonardo da Vinci kept a neat, organized record of his designs. The first sentence of that paragraph tells me the opposite thing, so it's straight away false. Now if we move to the next questions 34 to 40, in this part we have summary completion. So this is a very typical type of questions that you normally get in IELTS Reading Passage 3. We can only complete the summary with one word only, so please pay attention to that. If it says one word only, if it was the Renaissance, you cannot say the Renaissance, you can only say Renaissance, because the counts actually as a one word. So if it says two words, we could have used the Renaissance, because the Renaissance is two words. And the same if you have the other article. If it was a Renaissance, the article a counts as a single word. So please be careful with that. Those are pretty basic, so please be aware of them. And here, because it says one word only, we're gonna have to try and find only one word. You can have different instructions there. It could be 2 or 3 words, so you have more freedom there, but please make sure that you follow the exact instructions that are provided. Now, if I read the first sentence, collection of Leonardo da Vinci's paperwork reveals his design of a new city beside the Ticino River. This was to provide. So as I mentioned before, here I can see this Ticino River, and since it's actually a name, all I need to do is find the paragraph that mentions this. It starts with a capital, so I need to locate the exact same word. And I remember the paragraph where it was mentioned. It was in the 5th paragraph. From the largest collection of Leonardo's papers ever assembled, a series of innovative thoughts can be reconstructed regarding the foundation of a new city along the Ticino River, which runs from Switzerland to Italy and in 248 kilometers. He designed the city for the easy transport of goods and clean urban spaces, and he wanted a comfortable and spacious city with well-ordered streets and architecture. So I was thinking of the word city, but since it has already been mentioned here, that information is already here. So if I go back, this was to provide for trade. It's essentially the same sentence, it's rephrased. He designed this city for the easy transport of goods and clean urban spaces. So that's what he designed the city for, and I can already see my word, which is the transport, because the second part is already mentioned. The urban clean spaces here is more of a less polluted environment. So that refers to the urban space, and this was to provide, he designed it for easy transport, better transport for trade and less polluted environment. So that was my sentence. I could already get the keyword from there, and I'm gonna put here transport. So if I continue, although Leonardo da Vinci's city shared many of the ideals of his time, some of his innovations were considered unconventional in their design. Unconventional means that like it doesn't follow. If I say something is unconventional, conventional is more like regular. If I say unconventional, it means it's different. It's something innovative. If I say this building is conventional, it means that it's like regular, something that we're all familiar with. So actually, as I was reading, I remember seeing the word unconventional. So they included features that can be seen in some tower blocks today, such as on the exterior of a building. So let me try and locate this. I remember seeing the word unconventional in one of the paragraphs. I'll try and find that word again. Yeah, it was in the 6th paragraph. This design can be seen in some of today's high-rise buildings, but was unconventional at the time. So the innovative aspect or the unconventional aspect that I'm looking for is located on the exterior of the building, and that's what I need to find. Leonardo wanted the city to build on several levels linked with vertical outdoor staircases. So outdoor and exterior are synonyms. If I say the exterior of the building, it means on the outside of the building, and outdoor, it means something that happens outside your door. So it's somewhere outside, literally outdoor. But the word itself, outdoor, when I say I'm going outdoors, you can also go for a hike in the mountains or to some national park. So that's what outdoor means. And the aspect here itself is vertical outdoor staircases. This design can be seen in some of today's high-rising buildings, but was unconventional at the time. So we do have this design aspect in today's building, however, it was unconventional at the time. Probably no one before Da Vinci ever thought about it. As I mentioned, the way I found it, I remember that I read this unconventional. I came straight to the paragraph where it's mentioned. As I read literally only the sentence, I didn't even look at the first sentence of the paragraph. I only read the start of the sentence where I saw that word, and then the one just before that, and I could see this vertical outdoor staircases. This design can be seen in some of today's high-rise buildings, but was unconventional at the time. So if I go back to my summary here, they included features that can be seen in some tower blocks today, such as staircases on the exterior of the building. And that's what, like, if it was 2 words, I could have included vertical staircases. However, because the instruction here specified 1 word only, so I'm gonna put staircases on the exterior of the building, which is the outdoor. Now let's move on. Leonardo da Vinci wasn't only an architect, his expertise in... If you focused on the word architect, you would see it in this paragraph. While in the upper layers of the city, people could walk and disturb between elegant places and streets. The lower layer was the place for services, trade, transport, and industry. But the true originality of Leonardo's vision was its fusion of architecture and engineering. So these 2 words are mentioned right next to each other and in the paragraph. That's what I have here. So Leonardo da Vinci wasn't only an architect, his expertise in engineering, I would say, was evident in his plans for artificial canals within his ideal city. So here Leonardo da Vinci wasn't only an architect, his expertise in engineering. So if you focused on the keyword architect and try and locate that in the text, you will find the other word, which is engineering, right next to it. And I think what gives it away is the design in his plans for artificial canals within his ideal city. So we were talking about designing of artificial canals, and this type of work, you require like an engineering knowledge. Obviously you cannot just be an artist or like an architect. And here it was mentioned, Leonardo designed extensive hydraulic plants to create artificial canals throughout the city. So for someone to be able to do this type of work, they have to be an engineer. And I am an engineer myself actually, so that was like very straightforward to spot. But if you just focus on the word architecture and also the design of the canals, you will find it in this paragraph. And then when you come here, you read about what you need here is his expertise in engineering was evident in his plans for artificial canals with his ideal city. And then let's continue. He also believed that the height of the houses should relate to the width of streets in case of earthquakes occurred. The design of many cities in Italy today follows this. My keyword that I remember reading in the text was earthquake, so I'm going to quickly go back and see where I actually saw that. So this is where that sentence starts. Leonardo also thought that the width of the streets ought to match the average height of the adjacent houses, a rule still followed in many contemporary cities across Italy to allow access to sun and reduce the risk of damage from earthquakes. I have the exact same words, followed, a rule still followed in many contemporary cities. And contemporary means modern. I'm going to go back. The design of many cities in Italy today, contemporary, follows. It was the exact same word, followed. So number 37 is rule. You see, I think it's pretty straightforward. Now if I continue, while some cities from blank 38 times have aspects that can also be found in Leonardo's designs, his ideas weren't put into practice until long after his death. As I mentioned, like if you should always try to scan with the first sentence of the paragraph. So in the paragraph just before the last one, there is, although some of these features existed in Roman cities before Leonardo's drawings, there had never been a multi-level compact modern city which was thoroughly technically conceived. Aspects is a synonym with features. So some cities from, and that paragraph was talking about the Roman cities, features, aspects. Although some of these features existed in Roman cities before Leonardo's drawings, there had never been a multi-level compact modern city which was thoroughly, which means extensively or comprehensively. It's like completely, technically conceived. So technically is always related to an action. If I say theoretically, it means like it's only on paper. I might have some ideas theoretically, I might think, but technically, if I say technically, it's related to like the practical side, conceived. So if it was never technically conceived, it means that it was never put into action, or it was never like put into practice. So this is my answer here, Roman cities, and the keyword was cities and conceived. The word technically conceived, which means put into practice, and features, which was also a synonym of aspect. There we go, Roman times. Now if I continue reading, 39, which is a blank, is one example of a city that was redesigned in the 19th century in the way that Leonardo had envisaged. His ideas are also relevant to today's world. So number 39, I know that it has to be a city, the name of a city. So if we go back, and also I can focus on the 19th century, and I know that the answer should be the name of a city. We'll remember reading about those two earlier cities, Pienza and Ferrara. However, they were in a different context where, so if we're talking about the 19th century, that's what I need to focus on. If I am just scanning through the passage, I can already see the dates of 1853 and 1870. So that's the 19th century. So be careful, because when we say the 21st century, the century when we are living today, which is the 21st century, and the date is 2024, it's not 2124, that would be the 22nd century. So if I'm looking for an information there for the 19th century, I can already see those two dates that stick out from the whole body of the text, so I don't need to waste much time. So that immediately stands out. I get an idea that my information could be there. And actually when I look at this paragraph, I can already see the 19th century there as well. So if I read, indeed, it wasn't until the 19th century that some of his ideas were applied. For example, the subdivision of the city by function with services and infrastructures located in the lower levels and wide and well-ventilated boulevards and walkways above the residence, is an idea that can be found in George Eugène Haussmann's, sorry, my French. So this is a name of renovation of Paris under Emperor Napoleon III between 1853 and 1870. So this is in the 19th century. So the answer that I was looking for, I only care about the name of the city, which is Paris. And I know that it was done in the 19th century. The dates give it away, also the exact same words I mentioned. It wasn't until the 19th century that some of his ideas were applied, and obviously it follows. So city was redesigned, renovated in the 19th century in the way that Leonardo had envisaged. Envisaged is like envisioned, or the way he wanted it to be. His ideas are also relevant to today's world, where building no longer seems to be the best approach. So this is a summary of the text, which means like a small version of the text itself, and the information just before the last paragraph. So since the passage follows a chronological order, or the summary should also follow a chronological order, I know exactly that the last sentence in that summary has to be in the very last paragraph, because the question right before that was in the paragraph before the last. I know immediately that the word that I am looking for there is in the very last paragraph. Today, Leonardo's ideas are not simply valid, they actually suggest a way forward for urban planning. Many scholars think that the compact city built upwards instead of outwards, integrated with nature, with efficient transport, could help modern cities become more efficient and sustainable. This is yet another reason why Leonardo was aligned so closely with modern urban planning and centuries ahead of his time. I can already see the answer there. Many scholars think that the compact city built upwards instead of outwards. So instead of is actually what's giving me the answer here. And in the summary, where building no longer seems to be the best approach. So things used to be done in a certain way, but doing them in a different way is currently the best approach. So here it is asking me what was no longer seems to be the best approach. I'm gonna go back. What was the approach in the past? Think that compact city built upwards instead of outwards. So building upward, it means that you build in the up direction. Outward, you expand, so you take more footprint, you use more land. The buildings are not very high, but then you occupy more land, and that is, since it leaves more footprint, probably we need to destroy more nature, more forest to build like for the same number of people. So it's better to build upward from a sustainable point of view. So that's my answer here, and I'm gonna say where building outwards no longer seems to be the best approach. So I was already, when it says no longer seems to be, and it's comparing different approaches, I can already expect that there's going to be some comparison there between two different approaches. And the word that gave it away was instead of. To do something in a certain way instead of the other way is the better approach. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So we've got the summary here done. Now this brings me to the end of the video. I hope that you learned some new vocabulary today. Also, I hope that you can use some of the strategies that I shared with you in the way how you look for the answer in the passages, if you apply some of these thinking. But most importantly, what you have to do is practice on a regular basis, and that's actually the only way how you can improve. There is no magical formula, and that's why I advise you, please keep on practicing. If you still have other questions related to other parts of the IELTS, if you want to see more of these reading videos, please let me know in the comments down below. If you want to see similar videos, consider subscribing if you haven't done so. Till I see you next time, make sure you are practicing, and best of luck with your IELTS test.